Good question. Amelia, do you know the password for the?
There should not be a password. It should be an open link. I can share the link with you again. In the chat, give them this link. This is the public link.
Give me a second. It's a bit late here, sorry. Long day.
And we'll just give people one more minute to join and we'll start.
Okay.
And there's no Zoom password.
No, there should be no Zoom password whatsoever. However, they need to log into their own Zoom account in order to access. So that might be the password it's asking for. Is their
And
own Zoom.
if they don't have a Zoom account, they need to sign up for free.
They will have to make one, but it's very quick to make one and free. Okay, and with your permission, I think we'll just get rolling here. It's a little after 4:30 p.m. and I want to welcome everyone to the energy panel of the 14th Annual Social Responsibility Forum. My name is Amelia Nielsen and I am a coordinator of Net Impact. This panel about reimagining energy for a world that is net positive for people and planet is co-hosted by Net Impact and by the Energy Club. And with me repping for the Energy Club is Stefania Albarosa and Christian Bajak. And Christian, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Amelia. Welcome to everyone. We are super pleased to have you in this tremendous panel that we have today. Inside the Social Responsibility Forum, which is this week at IE, we have this super transformational panel, a specific panel, which is Reimagine Energy. And for that, we have three super well-skilled professionals in this particular area, which is Diego Ibarra, the Managing Director at NG Impact. We have Morgan Eldred, the Managing Partner at Digital Energy. And we have Paul Behrens, which is Assistant Professor of Energy and Environmental Change at Leiden University. But not only that, he's an author of The Best of Time, The Worst of Time, and he's an expert in wind energy and mountain terrains. So the three of them have special skills in this particular subject that we are going to discuss today through several questions that we already prepared. For that, let me tell you to all the attendants that we would like to have all the questions that you could have. We are going to collect it in the Q&A section, for the Q&A section in the chat, so you can write it. I'm going to collect it, the team is going to collect it, and we are going to ask to these three tremendous panelists that we have today. So feel free to ask whatever you want regarding this particular topic. And we are going to start as soon as possible with all these questions that we prepare. But first, let's please, Diego, Morgan, Paul, try to introduce yourself, explaining what you did, what are your expertise, where did you study, all the relevant information that you think is useful for all the attendants. So please, whoever wants to start. Paul,
Yes,
Paul is Morgan.
Yes, okay. So Morgan Eldred, my specialization is what the name of my firm does. So digital in the energy industry. So focusing on, digital transformation and drive, using digital technologies, workflows, processes to drive, transformational change. And specifically, we focus on the supply chain within the energy sector. And when we say supply chain, we mean actually a supply network, because it's not necessarily a chain. It's not linear in its approach. My background is I have a PhD in computing, MBA from IE Business School, and master's in IT law as well. My career has been with Gartner in running the upstream oil and gas research, with Maersk Oil, and with Shell in a variety of roles.
Thanks. Paul, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. I'm an assistant professor in energy and environmental change, but I work in industrial ecology. So I work basically in the interconnection between climate, food, energy systems, and economics. Thank you for introducing the book, The Best of Times, The Worst of Times. I've got to get practice at this. Futures from the Frontiers of Climate Science, and in it I look at pessimistic and hopeful chapters. So one chapter on each for different systems in society. So food, energy, economics, climate, and look at just how dire the environmental situation looks like what we can actually expect, and what hope we can have for, as Morgan said, non-linear change and non-linear solutions to address these problems. And so by doing so, look at quite what the gap is and what the gap we need to narrow is for the future. My background's in physics, in atmospheric physics, but I quickly moved on to other things. So looking forward to the discussion today.
Thanks.
Fantastic. I think I'm the last one. So good afternoon, everyone. Diego Ibarra here, Managing Director for NG Impact in Americas. We, NG Impact is a global business unit of the NG Group, $70 billion energy company. Within the Americas, we see everything from North, Central, and South America. NG Impact was created as the strategic consulting arm of NG to support, clients or big governments and organizations decarbonize fast and at scale. In terms of academics, my background is a master's and a doctorate, a PhD from Harvard and MIT in energy and environmental technologies. Over there, I had the chance throughout the years to go back to a lot of this kind of webinars and discussions at Sloan and HBS. So, this is great. Thank you very much for the invitation as well. And before joining NG Impact, I was also part of BCG in San Francisco, doing management consulting, focused on the energy industry, a lot of utility transformations for the future throughout the US, a little bit in the UK. So addressing a lot of the early challenges that utility companies, regulated or unregulated, we're facing in this decarbonization transition. So a lot of interesting views, perhaps, that I can share today.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the three of you. Okay, let's go straight to the questions, because I see that most of the people are having questions, actually, just to add in the final. When discussing environmental pollution and climate change, okay, conversations tend to circle around regulation and innovation on the different side. For you, for the three of you, which one will play a more significant role, and in what kind of activities of the energy industry? Do you consider one of them more important than the another one?
So maybe I'll start on this. So I think regulation is required. As an example, if we look at even the way that we report on things, I would call it like environomics, right? Like how do we get to the economics of the environment, right? What's the cost? We're seeing things like, okay, you're doing carbon storage, right? Which is great. We're going to go now, big offshore wind. But if we don't have regulations in terms of how we're actually monitoring and reporting, I think what's going to occur then on the technical innovation side is you're going to have multiple issues of like, yeah, there's great technology, but how do you know which technology is the best to apply? As an example, if I'm an oil and gas company, so what do I then focus on? Hey, you know what? I'm going to, get all my abandoned wells and I'm going to, use that for carbon storage. great. So I'm just kind of offsetting it. But is that really enough, right? Because what about all the stuff that happens in this, the supply network across this industry, right? There's an awful lot of carbons that are created. How are we capturing that? How are we reporting that? So I think regulation is going to need to kind of step up and is going to be more of the driver, because technology exists. Technology keeps coming up. It's like the regulation needs to apply to the organizations to drive it, right? Because the organizations are going to do, I want the best NPV for my business. I can say I want to go net zero, but do I really want to do it? Like what are the factors driving that? And the way that you need to do that is we need regulations, and we need to focus on, I would say, the environomics of that, so that we make sure that we are, or organizations are accurately putting forward their emissions, right? The measures are there. We have trust in the data that's being done, and would be able to model it. And I don't see the innovation in the industry being able to do that. I think that has to come from the regulators, and I think that's, in my opinion, that's the biggest driver, right? Because that's the driver that will put the pressure, like let's call it downstream within the operations, to really make the change.
Perhaps I can jump with I think the similar outcome, but a different view, right? So in my view, you definitely need both, right? So it's the same answer. I think we're not going to solve this challenge with innovation alone or regulation alone. But if you look at innovation, right? So to decarbonize economies at speed and at scale, we'll need things like hydrogen, we'll need CCUS, we'll need, the cost curves of battery storage to go down. But in order to push all this fundamental research, right, to commercialization, we will need regulation, we will need incentives, right? So we've seen this back in the day with solar in Germany. We saw this with renewables in the US, with the IFC tax incentives, with wind incentives, multiple state incentives, right? You will need some kind of regulatory environment that incentivizes innovation to quickly jump from fundamental research to large-scale implementation, right? To drive the cost curves down and be able to achieve those changes at speed, right? At the pace that we need them, right? At the same time, again, regulation is critical to send the right market signals all the way from investors, right, to those investing in those companies, to investing or giving guidelines to the companies that are investing in the type of technologies they're acquiring, right? You've seen BlackRock being one of those big examples, right? So putting board guidelines to these are the type of companies that we're going to start investing. Those market signals respond to some kind of competitive advantage that regulatory players can exploit. So again, I think regulation is critical in the way that you do market signals, in the way that you align local with government with global programs, and in the way that you, let's say, potentiate, right? So that you really make the bigger impact on the fundamental research that we're doing today. We won't solve the question. We won't solve this challenge with either one of those by themselves.
Super.
Yeah, I just totally double down what Diego and Morgan has said there. I would say regulations are the playing field by which companies and other, society in general are incentivized to act, and those playing fields have to be regulated to get to where we need to go. If you had a look at PV and lithium ion, for example, that was a situation where there was no clear incentivized way in which that was going to be scaled up without regulation, without the huge subsidies in feed-in tariffs of Germany. You can make arguments about whether that was the correct way to do it, or auctions or whatever, but regardless of that, it took the push and the pull policies of governments to bring that to allow what the market does best, which is drive down the costs of those innovations to a point that now, if we were to actually get rid of the sunk costs of the entire fossil fuel infrastructure, there's no way we'd build it again. The only reason why we continue on in that inertia is because we've already got those social and technological lock-ins. So the regulation is absolutely key to allow the best to come from that innovation.
Yeah, this could sound like a tricky question. Obviously, it's an open-ended question, but for the three of you, I see that the three of you have the same path in terms of what we think we need as a conjunction between the regulation and the innovation. But this could be a tricky question, but let's try to answer. So we agree, you agree actually, in the sense in which the regulator need to be there, obviously, but politically, what regulators need? Is it a political problem? Is a challenge for them as politicians? Or do we need to change the way in which we vote properly? Is a problem of incentives, maybe, for the regulators, meaning the government? Or how do you think we could combine this technological and institutional innovation to create all these new markets, these potential markets for the future, and deliver socially and environmentally these sustainable products we are talking about? How do we change this regulator? Because as Diego was saying, the innovation is already there. Like all these advances in technology is already there, but how we convince the regulators just to join this improvement in technology, in innovation?
So I mean, I'll since we started this way, I'll jump in this. So I think you've got some major issues there. So I really like what Paul mentioned about, you know, this sunk cost and infrastructure. So if we look at transmission, right, transmission networks as an example. So you've got regulators that regulate the transmission networks, need to make sure that your distribution always goes to the consumer, right? So, you know, their concern is what? Their concern is, you know, they want to make sure that the power of cost of volt is stabilized, and they want to bring that cost down. But then what happens is that energy mix that comes in, and then to the consumer, how are you going to regulate that as an example? Because while the technology is also there, let's not fool ourselves. Renewable is not, in its current stage, renewables is not a steady stream, right? You know, the wind changes, right? The sun comes in down, right? So into the grid that you distribute, it's not steady. So obviously from a digital side, I'm going to think about data, right? So it's always about data. How do we get that data? How do we regulate that? Then how can we optimize our grids? How can we optimize our off-grid networks? And I think one of the things as well that's also very important, and if we think about the infrastructure, we can't just get rid of fossil fuels, because where are we going to get our polymer from, right? You know, like where are all the things as a society that we have built industry up, you know, where's that going to come? And for me, that's where I focus on, and of course it's my thing, is focusing on the data, because, you know, we can have the data, and then you need to be able to run models, because the existing infrastructure, because we still have infrastructure, you know, on transmission lines into people's homes, right? We still have pipelines, right, that run. So all of this needs to, in my view, be regulated in terms of a common set of data that people can use, because then that common set of data makes the playing field leveled. And then organizations can start, and governments can start to look at their energy mix and start to truly optimize, because at the moment it's not optimized, right? There's competitions on the grid. They don't know how to manage that demand and the subsequent supply. So for me, in terms of like the approach, and I'm going to do this from my area of expertise, is it's getting, you know, a level set of data, a data model that's there, you know, set of metrics that are fair for everyone, that then can be run. Like, you know, there is no common set of data. There is no common set of standards where we can do this. We can actually run, you know, advanced modeling, and we can look at, you know, from our energy mix, we're going to get this much from solar, we're going to get this much from wind, this much from nuclear, you know, gas. You know, we don't have a way to model that, and that is, you know, exceedingly important when we take, you know, what was mentioned about the existing infrastructure. We're, you know, these projects are not economical unless we use the existing infrastructure. So in my view, you know, one of the starting points for this is getting, you know, a regulator or a cohesive standard industry data model that everyone is then using the same way to play. And then we can take, and the data then also needs to be open to the right players so that we can model it properly. So it's about, you know, openness of data and a common standard. And from my perspective, that is what is critical and needs to be done.
So let me continue with that. I totally agree, and you know, data is one of the big pieces that the regulators can the big enablers, right? So if you have the right data, right resolutions publicly available, you incentivize innovation, you uncover all the potential savings. And a little bit from my point of view, right, my expertise, I think, you know, again, making the changes that we need at scale and at speed, speed and scale to achieve that 1.5, degree target, we need this. This is going to be a lot more on just technology, as we were saying, right? Regulators need to send the right signals. In the US, the PUCs, the Power Utility Commissions, right, need to send the right signals to the utilities, to the investors, so that they start, switching and thinking about new business models and new, change management within these organizations. We know that utilities, right, the energy sector is one of the less agile, less, slow transforming industries. And that's for a reason, right? We've been transmitting electrons in a similar way for the last, 100 years, right? So the regulator signals that to for example, a regulated utility, and there were many cases in the last 10 years in the US, so you need to start thinking about the utility of the future, what it means for, infra investments, right? What kind of investments will you need? What are the business cases that you then will translate to the end customer, right? So the rate case, right? At the end of the day, your forecast of the business model will be charged to the end customer at a given electricity rate, right? So how are you thinking about that? What are the new business models where you want to play in DER, in distributed energy resources, right? And if you want to play in this new data-rich environment, right? As Morgan was saying, what are the talent and the change management within your organization that you need to start thinking of, right? And all those things in the big companies, the big organizations that will make a change are not a year or two cycles, right? We're talking about a much larger recruiting, talent management, smart meter infra deployment, right? So there's a much bigger set of things that need to happen. And in order to make that kind of decision strategically at a company, you need strong market signals, right? And regulators are the ones that are in charge of giving those big market signals that would align the stakeholders.
Yeah, I think this is really good points. I mean, and let's be honest that the electricity markets are a bit of a mess for where they need to get to. If you have these marginal dispatch, I don't know how far we want to go down into the market design, but this marginal dispatch is not going to keep us going for when we start hitting the buffers of the renewables on the system. And if you have a look at, if you have a look at numerous articles, we can really get to about sort of 60 to 70% electrification of the entire energy system. They're straight, quote unquote, easy to decarbonize. And so we can actually go a lot of the way already with the systems that we've got, the markets that we've got, but we are going to need tweaking some of these issues, like whether it's capacity markets, whether it's more integrate. I would like to go down Morgan's route of more data and more internet connection, information technology connection with the electricity system, demand response and these sorts of things. But these are really, really big questions for quite a risk-averse sector of the economy. And working with utilities in New Zealand, I experienced that quite a lot. These guys were very, very nervous about bringing in smart meter technology, for example, and this sort of thing, which perhaps we can talk about. On the final point about the niche markets, I think regulation has another really key place to play in terms of niche markets for technologies that can't scale yet. Things like synth fuels and things like this. There are niche markets around the world, like in California, where you can actually profitably produce synthetic oils and things like this. And those markets are invaluable as a stepping stone to scale. And they don't really exist in many places yet, at least not these markets that we need to see. So and another role for regulation around the world.
Thanks. Super insightful. I have a question for Martin Bart, who is asking something that I was writing it just to ask it at the end of the presentation, but I think it's super relevant for this particular we are discussing. So Martin is asking, don't you think, guys, that regulation plays less and less of the role since renewable, for example, energy becomes so cheap? There are a lot of technologies becoming super cheap. And for example, renewable energy is becoming super cheap. And maybe the adoption to such is just a pure market-driven price business case decision. And it's not going to have a lot of weight in terms of regulation. What do you think about this technology becoming super cheap, and what is the impact on regulation for this?
So I think in an ideal world, yes, you can say it's cheap, right? And it's gonna come down. But like, you know, I think when you actually work, you know, the guy said, you know, you've got to understand the existing system. So the existing system is these big companies, they are capital intensive. They stick in, you know, massive investments that they do up front to build their facilities, to build the infrastructure. Then they run it for a very long time. Historically, you know, they have always paid high dividends, right? So the share prices are there. So you have to look at, and as mentioned, they're not geared up for technological change. The change management, you know, inside in terms of upskilling the people that exist, bringing new skills that are required to integrate this technology. They are not prepared for this. So I don't see that the cost is going to come down. Yes, okay, if you're in like a microgrid world and you're doing that can perfectly fine. But guess what? Microgrids will not sustain economies for energy, right? Like as an example, you know, one of the biggest inventors, like we talk about hydrogen, but you know, smart transportation will actually drive, you know, has the potential to drive an awful lot, you know, within supply chains and within the economy. I don't see that it can necessarily be market driven because, you know, energy is a national, it's a national security. Whether you, let's say we're here in the Middle East and it's because it's so much of the national economy, or if it's in Europe and, you know, we need to make sure that in the winter people are heated, right? We need to make sure that there's power. So, you know, and that goes into the high cost and the slowness of these industries to do things is we can't just kind of, it can't be Uberized because it's too important. Like as an example, you know, when I lived in Japan, right? And we went to their largest in TEPCO at the time, they don't exist anymore, but we went to their largest LNG gas implant. They had, you know, they had enough power to have blackouts for 3 days, right? Now you start thinking about it. If something goes wrong, right? If something goes wrong, day 4, day 5, this is like when revolutions start. You know, I mean, we've seen it with COVID, you know, like, you know, how people are at home, they're frustrated and all of this, but we've still been able to heat ourselves. We've still been able to get our basic things. The concern that will happen there is prices can come down in certain areas, and they will in certain things, you know, at a micro scale, they will. But, you know, to sustain this infrastructure and ensure that we have high quality of life, the price is not going to drop dramatically. So if we look in like 2007, you know, 6 of the top 10 listed companies were oil and gas or you know, GE, which was number 2 at the time, which is a massive service provider. We looked in then 2017 and Exxon, which was like, you know, the top went down to 5, GE, which was second, went all the way to 9, and the rest of them jumped off. All of that technology, all of that infrastructure that we have, it still requires energy and power, right? So while we think the cost has gone down, it's not. Then if we look at the other part, which is, you know, because it's market driven, what about water? So historically, the world has thought about water, and we've thought about water being, you know, an infinite resource. And we thought about, let's say, fossil fuels being a finite resource. That somehow is changing. Now the world is starting to think, well, maybe that energy sources are an infinite resource, but now we see the quality of water becoming a finite resource. So the balance there will stop. And you can't take water out of, you know, the energy question. And that is going to, so what I'm trying to say is, I believe the market will still balance it out. So while it will be low cost in certain areas, system wide, that's not going to change, in my view.
Yeah, no, I agree. Let me also give a little bit of the, you know, the business side and you know, the cash flow perspective, right? So renewables, why renewables right now without regulation cannot be, you know, by itself, think like solar or wind, the solution, right? So one, and Morgan already and Paul already referred to it, is the variability of the grid, right? Right now, today, with massive variability of wind and solar, you cannot ensure the stability of the grid, right? And utility companies are regulated by the stability and the blackouts and how consistent are you providing power to your consumers, right? Your customers. So that's one. The second part, which is key for the business model, is as Morgan was saying, these utility companies make massive capex investments, right? Billions of dollars, and they run in the balance sheets, they're depreciating them and basically translating those benefits into a lower electricity rate or gas rates for consumers, right? If that means that coal assets or natural gas assets that run very cheaply, like in the US, right? If I have them already in my balance sheet and I'm depreciating them, I have no incentive to phase them out, right? Regulation is going to be the key keys that start incentivizing the companies to start thinking on doing massive scale renewables if I'm comparing to a capex investment that is already depreciated in my balance sheet, right? Second, to that variability, to address, to make more, let's say, public benefit out of this renewables, you'll need two things, right? One, that we're talking about storage, and that's where battery storage or hydrogen as a storage, vector come into play, and none of those are very well regulated today, right? There are incipient markets that need to be regulated in many countries. Hydrogen is not even, a clear definition who regulates. It's a gas, who, and so on. And the second part is, and Paul said this, there's so much you can electrify, right? So there's going to be a whole energy question, which is the replacement of diesel, right? And then the green gases and again hydrogen play a massive part, right? So again, renewables on the regulated side, PV and wind might help contribute to the current electrification needs, but then the hydrogen piece, which is using these renewables to produce electrolysis to hydrogen or green fuels, as one of the examples, are non-regulated. There's a lot of open areas that need to be addressed. And let me finish with one example on why regulation is needed, right? So one of the big utility transformation that I was able to contribute in the US was Hawaii, right? Hawaii faced significant pressure from the PUC, the Power Utility Commission, to really start thinking about how to become the utility of the future. As you can imagine, the most expensive electricity in the country, all imported, 30 cents per kilowatt hour. You were importing a lot of that, of course, diesel and gas, but you have a massive amount of renewable availability, right? Renewable potential. Because of the price of electricity and the renewable potential, PV, rooftop PV, residential PV was out the roof. The problem was there were over 1,000 people, and a couple thousand people, I can't remember the exact name, that were on waiting lists, that were not able to be connected to the grid. They had made the investments, they have the PV panels and the roofs, they just were not able to connect them and start saving money, right? The reason, infra deployment, right? There was not enough, they could not install enough smart meters to start understanding where the backflow of that energy. With a 20% of renewable residential PV penetration, you can imagine how complex it is to manage that system, right? The backflow of those PV into the grid were creating circuit instability, right? When you have such amount of electricity in your grid that you don't know where it's coming from because you don't have smart meter throughout your network. So in short, the utility there was not able to allow these people to connect, creating a massive social issue, right? Technology was there, the business case was there, the intention of the utility to connect these people was there. It was just they could not deploy technology fast enough because the regulatory signals had not started, sufficiently, sufficient years before to start deploying those smart meters, so that at this point they could deploy and connect safely, maintaining the customer service that was a mandate by the utility, right? So in a way, technology, business case, willingness was there, but without the proper regulatory framework and then with anticipation, it was a failure at that point. And that was one of the many triggers that, basically triggered that utility transformation at that point a few years back.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, this is systems cost that we're talking about. So we're not. Yeah, it's great that renewables have become so cheap, and partly that is because of regulation. And McKinsey had a report out last year that looked at how existing coal and gas can be outcompeted by new solar and wind, but only if you've got the capital to invest. So it depends very much on the cost of capital. So even a depreciated coal plant can be taken off grid, but by 2030, that's kind of looking towards, not everywhere right now. Most of the studies seem to suggest that you can get 100% renewable grids, but this will require several things altogether. It will require demand response, require transmission, require storage and hydrogen. All of those things need massive regulation. And so far, we're only really talking about the supply side, probably because we're talking about the grids themselves. But we need to be looking at the demand side, and there's so many failures in current split incentives in the economics of, say, home insulation. Something very, very simple that we should have done years ago is getting houses up to standard, and yet we don't do it. The current exergy, the current efficiency, total efficiency of societies in terms of the amount of useful energy they get out for the energy in is only 10 to 15%, depending on which country you're looking at. And that's pretty appalling. And so regulation is clearly needed to overcome some of these things that aren't even technologically sort of innovative. We just need to get them done. So yeah, lots of room, lots of necessity for regulation there.
Thanks. Thank you for your thoughts, guys. I was going to ask because the three of you were mentioning these shareholders, IRR, dividends. In some way, you were mentioning Morgan already stated, like shareholders, IRR, the dividends, Diego as well, and you, Paul, implicitly. I was going to ask, what do you believe are the most common driver for the companies in the energy sector to apply these ESG measures? If maybe it's economic, like the cost of capital, competitive advantage, pressure from investors, reputation, maybe price. It could be maybe social, like pressure from non-governmental organizations, civil society, local community, whatever, or political, maybe the regulatory and obviously going to need for licenses to operate. But according to what you were answering, the question is already, like, we know what are the drivers. The question is, could we change the drivers? Could we try to change the economic drivers for all of these technologies instead of just being economic, being more social or political in terms of regulation? Could we just change that? Do you think that it's going to be like a smooth transition, and obviously it's going to be, as Diego were saying, more oriented to all these signals that politicians and obviously regulators are going to send? What do you think about that?
So if I look at this, I'm trying to build an analogy in my head, but if you go to the biggest dog in the house, or if you go to the biggest dog in the house and you say, you know what, I'm going to take away all your bones, or I'm going to take away a lot of your bones, you're going to have a mad and angry dog, right? So if I look at it, and I'm coming from the hydrocarbon perspective here, right? So I'm thinking about, oil, specifically oil and gas, the big capital companies that have put it in. What is their driver? It's NPV. So even if we look in the renewable space, you can see it, BP's outlook, Total's output, Shell's scenarios, you start looking at what they've done. They've all talked about, moving towards a thing, but you also look at the investments they've made. The investments they've made is, while they're huge and in the billions of dollars, it's not really even 10% of their other projects that they're doing, right? And they're driven by shareholders. And whatever we say, Exxon, Chevron, Shell, BP, if we say that there's no state influence in them, and it's only Statoil, it's only Equinor, it's only Eni, it's only the national oil companies, then we're mistaken. So we have to understand that these big guys, you can take away a little bit, but they've still got it. They're, what are their plans? If this thing goes big, they still hold, remember, that's why I said at the beginning, they're capital intensive industries. They're going to deploy their capital and buy anyone else that comes in. So what are the incentives for them? It's very clear. They want long-term investment, on their long-term return on their investments. Everything is NPV. So I mean, I remember working in Shell, and we did something on, our weighted average cost of capital, and how we were, figuring that out was like massive, because it's not, that discount rate that they have, all the risk that goes in it, it's not a simple formula when you go that massive scale. So I don't, social, yes, okay. If we look at oil and gas, I don't want an oil spill because it's going to cost me a fortune, right? Socially, economically, I'm going to have people on my back. It's going to cost me billions of dollars. So I want to take care of the environment in that regards, right? I've got a whole bunch of people that I employ. So I want to, I do, socially want to do it. A lot of the stuff that we do is hazardous. So we're still, we're still in people's backyards. So we need to look after them. We need to make sure that, we're doing things as safe as we can. Actually, oil and gas companies get a bad reputation, as an example, but they're actually one of the leaders in CSR because they kind of have to, because they're seen with that dirty look. But I don't think they're going to change unless there is some real, as Diego mentioned, unless there's some real incentives for them to change. Why would I? Because if you're taking, if I'm the biggest dog and you're taking this around, what am I going to do? I'm going to buy the supply chain. I'm going to end up buying those things. So, they play nicely, but they may not necessarily play nice. And we can see that in parts of the world that have not had good, strong government, where oil companies run afoot. And we have to understand the capital they have, the supply chains that they manage and have working and contracting to them, the people that they have, the landowners that might be giving stuff up. They're not going to do it without incentives. So the only way that I can see that happening is through incentives. So what are those incentives? Okay, do you give them more land rights? Do you give them, feasible, subsidies, right? And I don't think you can get to that without understanding that the hydrocarbon part of the world is still the big dog, right? It still is the big dog. And we would need to start there to drive the rest. Because at the end of the day, my grid is not going to go in carbon storage and safe there. And we could see this, right? And as a big dog, what can I do? If I'm not behind hydrogen, if I'm not behind that, I'm just going to stick all of my money into other technological innovations and drive the world that way. And then, all of these things that come kind of can then, they won't hit the same way. That's
so let me give, in principle, of course, I agree, right? And as we've been saying, the shareholder return is always a conversation, right? But it's also, I think, fair to say that, in the last few years, we've seen all these big players also be willing to be part of the conversation, right? And be willing to start sitting down at the table with different players, with the commitment of moving in the right direction. So to be also fair to both sides, right, in a way. A good example is actually in Chile, the Ministry of Energy created a big consortium that was called a just transition to a just energy transition. And they involved, the Enel, the Engie, the IS Genero, all the big guys, right? Plus, mining companies, plus universities, plus unions, plus cities and townships where they were operating, in order to commit in the best way possible on how to remove all coal assets from the grid by 2040, starting by 11 coal assets, huge ones, by 2024, which is around the corner, right? And part of that, discussion table was basically having universities and townships identify the risk of unemployment, the need of capital for retraining, right? And reinvesting those unemployment government costs or public costs into technology training to reduce the risk of that technology change, right, or transition for the big energy players, right? At the same time, mining companies, which in Chile and Peru and all that area are huge off-takers, right? Massive off-takers, like 20-something% of the energy goes to mining companies, right? Having commitment of the off-taker and whatever potential impact in reliability or cost structures and so on, that change will not cause noise to my main client, my main off-taker, was a significant risk management strategy for the big energy players, right? And because this was called by the highest levels of the government, basically that enabled a serious framework where everybody was in agreement. And it was, at the end of the day, it was a voluntary agreement, but legally binding. So anyway, Engie and all these other players are offloading or transitioning out of decommissioning 11 coal assets in a given transition period, right? So that example shows that, again, regulator, not necessarily policy, right, but regulators have the power to bring all these big dogs throughout the value chain to the table, right? just the big energy players, as we're saying, we're just talking about the gen side, right? Well, it's generation, transmission, and demand, right? And all the stakeholders in between, especially when you're talking about social justice, right? Which today, social, right, informs politics fairly directly, right? We've seen everything that happened in the US, everything that happened in South America, throughout different countries as well. So that link is more crisp than ever, right? So having all the right stakeholders on the table, it's key. And I think, again, governments and high regulatory environments are the only players that can bring everybody to the table with the right level of assurance, if you wish.
So Christian, I hope you don't mind. I think we should transition into the Q&A now. We have a few questions from the audience already, and I wanted to start with the first question we got earlier in the chat here. Sorry. Oh, I apologize. It's hard to see because I have too many windows open, so I will fix this. It was from I apologize. I thought I was ready and I wasn't. We'll go with Manuel Belek then. We'll go with Manuel Belek's question, who asks for Paul. Paul, you mentioned the very low efficiency on the demand side. What are the key factors causing that low efficiency and how could they be improved?
Well, it's low efficiency of the system. So it's on the supply and the demand side. And partly we throw around 50% of the energy away when we convert fossil fuels into motive energy. So steam engines and things like this. Basically, if you electrify things, the system as a whole becomes much, much more efficient. Because electric motors are far more efficient, electric cars are far more efficient, heat pumps are far more efficient, these sorts of things. So you improve the efficiency massively. And that's a really important point because you often see people talking about how renewables don't actually contribute much to the system at the moment, where you can usually take those estimates and multiply them by about 4 or 5. So close to 6%, 10%, depending on the country, just by looking at the amount of useful energy you get out, because most of the time there's this energy accounting issue. So that's what's causing that low efficiency is the low efficiency of the system. And also, of course, the insulation, which I mentioned before. We do, depending on the society, have very wasteful societies around the world. It depends on which society you're looking at. Some are fairly good, like, well, Scandinavia, Germany, some of these countries have pretty good standards, and some are pretty poor, like the US.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to invite Martin Bart to ask your question. Martin, I'm going to give you mic powers if you want to ask your question live.
Oh, I think my question, hello everyone. My question already has been asked and also been answered. It was the one around the role of regulation that I do believe plays less and less of a role because of the price drop in renewable energies. So I think we did cover that, but thanks.
Yeah, we already asked the question of Martin, Amelia.
My apologies.
Don't worry. One of the questions actually for the three of you is, if you know, and if you have some kind of answer for this, is what do you consider are the barriers and biggest challenges for the companies in the energy industry to move quicker towards a decarbonized economy or business model? And what is the effect of COVID-19 in this transition towards a decarbonized economy or business model? What do you think about that?
So I've got a great example that we've done. So we did a thing with clients. So this was for, offshore marine, and we used, data, we used technology to optimize their delivery route, how they did that. And we found that, between 30 to 50% fuel savings, can be done through more advanced technology, better processes, better planning, better optimization of the supply chain. So that's very significant for big companies within their own operations to significantly cut down. But the barriers to inertia was, so this was great. It's, everyone was like amazing, but then you go into the politics of organizational politics, right? Organizational politics are like, but this solution can get me out of a job. I can lose power. We can't change our processes as fast as the technology is there, right? There's this, as Diego mentioned earlier, there's this change management, right? Like, you got to think about it. People have been doing a job for 20 years and all of a sudden you come and you transform it. They're not ready for it, especially when you consider that in most cases, 99% of the employees are risk adverse. So they're like quality assurance. 1% of the employees is an innovator. Let's go, let's do that. And that's just the inertia of the system, how it's been created. So I see that, the biggest adoption, of course, is, I could say to you, digital technology, i.e. just optimizing our existing systems, removing across our supply chain the inefficiencies, has enormous benefit, like massive, even more than I would say new energy technologies. Just removing that is so massive. But organizations are not these. So you think about it, if I'm making an economic decision to build something that costs billions of dollars, and then I run it and I start getting profit, and my incentives are built out, my NPV is built out over 20 years to return on that. I'm not going to make a quick decision and move just like that. No, I need to have people study it. I need to make sure that, it's hazardous environments that we work within operations. What happens in the stability of the grid? Turbines go down, and there's blackouts. So, for me, it's the inertia of the existing system. It's the way that the organizations operate, and you can't regulate that, by the way. This is the organization efficiencies. And like if we look at like digital technologies, it's amazing, and truly transformational, but organizations can't change that fast. They, from a financial decision at the top level, have never been set up to do it. So yes, while the smaller players are coming in and they can make great things, that's the innovators. When you want to do it at scale, it's a completely different story. We're looking, in Teesside in the UK, they're building the world's largest offshore wind farm. How's that going to go? How's that going to connect with the grid? How's that then going to be managed? How's it going to be services? As Paul mentioned earlier, what happens if the consumers at home start having challenges? So the planners and who make the decisions to do this within the organizations, this takes years of experts, people in this here, to come together, to debate, to go through it, to make sure that it's going to be safe. That is not going to change. Like what we talk about, because when we've done operations, 30 to 50% fuel savings, that is absolutely insane, because that's only part of the system. The fact that you can deliver something more better means you're getting better plans for them. So you're reducing a lot of waste across the board. It really takes time. So, kind of what I always approach is, don't eat the elephant in one sitting. Like try to find where you can add innovation, do it. It doesn't have to be the biggest, but the most impact, and then build the scale from there, because these organizations are so big and they've got so much scale and so much financial investment in it. And you have to think, in a lot of cases, the companies putting this capital in are also the ones insuring themselves as well. So there's high risk levels. So the organizations themselves, for me, are the real barrier to entry. Is they are not set up for, they're not set up to act like a Tesla. They're not set up to act like Solar City, right? That they're not set up, to do this. They are set up to deliver energy at scale, reliable energy at scale.
And even when they are, right, you might be Son Edison and take too much risk at scale and go bankrupt because you thought that rooftop, the rooftop PV model, annualizing the returns to retirement funds and pension funds, right, was a nice way to go. And you were growing faster than the market, analyze that you could grow because of change management and everything else, and you go bankrupt, right? And you're the biggest player or second biggest player in the US, right? So exactly to your point, even sometimes the big players, when they don't assess risk the right way, suffer some severe consequences. I think, some of the, challenges also are very much region dependent, right? So in the case, for example, again, in the case of North America, government consistency in the signals, right, is a big one, right? So Obama came with the CPP, which had a significant, the Clear Power Plan, right, Act, which had a significant impact on how utilities all throughout the country were thinking about their coal assets, divesting, not divesting, mergers actually got pulled out, didn't happen, or valuations went up when you were having more or less exposure to coal assets. Companies were really changing long-term strategy based on that very strong market signal, right? Unfortunately, President Trump came after that, and it's something that people thought was very much locked in within EPA, boom, right, disappeared, creating a whole new set of long-term signals, and basically removing a lot of what that thinking was established the years before. And again, states like New York or California have massive, really well-designed public policy, if you wish, but because some of these energy challenges are cross-boundary, right? So hydrogen value chains, right? Where it's cheap to produce solar for electrolysis and then use that to produce hydrogen and transport that hydrogen is across your borders, right? It might be Texas, it might be somewhere else. So your state level policies are not enough, right? So some of these challenges are regulatory challenges, vary per region. An example in South America is we have the government very clearly, in the case of Chile, for example, again, positioning the country for the future of the hydrogen economy with a renewable potential in the north and with PV and the south in Patagonia with wind. But it's a matter of bringing the off-takers to the table, right? And that off-taker, bringing people together, I think, if you ask me, is one of the biggest challenges, right? We see Microsoft with their, carbon negative commitment by 2030, and even, offsetting their historical carbon footprint by 2050, being those gigantic corporations that really try to create those market signals. We see the case of Amazon with something similar, trying to go with a massive interest in hydrogen, if you wish. But even those companies with this incredible market signals still, at the end of the day, they go to market and nobody has the control of the whole value chain of those solutions, right? You still need to bring a lot of players into the table and, to agree on that. So I think, again, collaboration, hubs, regulatory and policymakers to bring the right people, the right stakeholders to the table will be the biggest challenges. Energy companies are looking for long-term investments. They're going to assess their risk. They're going to make investments in a controlled manner in pilots. Those pilots need to control one of the biggest risks, which is the off-takers, right? And we need to solve those kind of questions for them to test the new business models, test the new cash flows, deploy talent the right way, manage data the right way. And when that is proven, shareholders will be, okay, it's time to scale, right? They're willing to make that investment, but you need to bring the right people to the table. And those people are different people in different regions.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, how to make it go faster. I think there are two major sort of potential emergencies that are going to be facing organizations and how they can actually respond to it quickly enough. It'll be a very interesting few years. One is the way in which financial, central banks will be changing the way in which carbon assets are valued. It looks to be coming in. And the second one is legal litigation. And both of those things seem to be massive risks for some existing companies at the moment. On the point about going fast enough, I think partly this is going to be dictated to by the environmental change that we're going to see in the next 10 years. I'm extremely concerned about what's happening, and also what's going to be happening to food systems, and what Morgan said about earlier about water systems. So I think this organizational thing is a very clear difficulty, the lock-in of organizations and the speed at which they can respond. But I think that the pace of that scale and the scale of thinking that people are going to have is going to be dictated to by the rate of change that we're going to see. I'll link to an article by a business guy in basically describing carbon lock-in, which might be of interest.
Super. We have a questions from William. He's able just to open his mic. William, do you wanna ask them, the speakers?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, yeah. I had a question for Diego. You were talking about the Biden administration. I'm actually in New York right now at the moment. And I'm not sure, maybe he hasn't published anything, but I was curious if you knew how now the EPA will change under Biden entering the White House. Do you know by any chance about some of his policies, or are they very similar to Obama's?
That's a very good question, and I'm afraid there's little public information that we can share, right? It's the signals, the market signals of people that are former teams from the staff of Obama that we work with and are part of our company or are returning to the to government today say that there's significant change coming, but it will take time, right? It will take time to reinstate in a way or build back to where the Obama policies were at. So I'm afraid no specifics to share at this point yet. But we are hopeful. Definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Good question, William. Thanks. We have another question from our coordinator of the IE Energy Club, Stefania wants to ask something. Stefania?
Yeah, so just there was not, well, without the Q&A section, there was not time for that, but I want to talk a little bit about how to account for the social cost of carbon, for example. Like, is there a way that you see that you could account for these? Like, I'm sure many of you heard about, I'm talking to the listeners, many of you heard about like the social cost of carbon and how it's accounted at around like $50 or $60 per tons of carbon emissions, and it's considered to be very low, and actually it could go up to $1,000 per ton of CO2 emissions. And I'm just wondering if this number will it always just be a theoretical number on how much we're damaging society by emitting carbon emissions, or is there a way to partially or fully integrate it within the costs of the companies that are emitting, so utilities and such, and all throughout the supply chain? Do you see this happening, or do you see this as more of an, let's say, theoretical number to put on a ton of carbon emissions?
So I think from the consumer perspective, right? We need to start tracking that information, right? Like you need to understand that. So do we have an app for that? Do we have our homes start to do that? How do we break that out? But I think kind of I would pose the question slightly different. You know, when consumers get very worried about this and very destabilized, you have to ask yourself, what kind of food are you eating? You know, how many deliveries do you get? How much time do you use transportation? You know, how much processed food do you have, right? As an example, because like what I'm trying to say there, this is, you know, the real thing is about how energy efficient are you as a consumer, and then you take that up. And every human is different, as an example, because it's always going to be theoretical. We can look in certain industrial areas and say, hey, we can generalize for the overall population and we can model that population. We can then look in cities and we can say, okay, this is the population, this is the generation that's done there, and we can build models on that. But I think the real key to this is what is the demand. And it was kind of mentioned before, you know, everything is modeled kind of on the supply. This is the demand. As an example, you might not see the connection, but you know, these things here, this is one of the things that has killed the grid and has killed, you know, the ability to actually understand responses, because you've got Moore's law, 18 months, you know, chips will change, technology will change. As consumers drive so much, you know, the demand comes from the consumers, and it's very hard to model that. Like going back to your question, it's really, really hard to model that. Yes, we can take some very basic aggregated numbers and pull models together, but to build really sophisticated models of numbers, we need to understand, you know, the human behaviors that are changing. And then we would need to model that, find the curve of human behaviors, how human behaviors are changing, because only when that happens as a society can you bring it down.
The question was more like, because you know how some utilities don't really change as fast, and the question is more about the fact that in the energy sector, because they are emitting all these carbon emissions, because like renewables still have maybe a lower margin sometimes and stuff like that. So they're like investing less in renewables as they should, and therefore they are still heavily fossil fuel based. So that was more like the question, whether we can account it within their costs, as like they are, these are costs, these are externalities. But yeah.
So maybe I didn't explain it. So I got what you were saying. What I was trying to say to this is I can accost for it in a very, very specific way. But these, you still got massive supply chains, and massive supply chains are based upon people, and they're based upon all the things that go into that system. So if you want to model that, you've got to actually start modeling the demand. As an example, I'll take something like flaring, which is in the oil and gas world, you basically, if you have gas and this massive carbon efficiencies that come out, you basically flare it off. So if you've got bad gas that you can't process, you flare. So I can model my flaring, but what doesn't happen to me is what went into my production. So what I'm trying to say is what goes into my production, like the cost to build something, the cost to set it up. That's the whole supply chain. That's not being modeled. So whatever numbers you have, it's still from a modeling perspective, it's still a number that's very theoretical, right? The only way you can really get that number and the true cost, right? The true cost is to model, the supply chain. And to start modeling the supply chain, you need to go into the behavior of, like almost human behavior to drive it. So what I'm trying to say is theoretically, we can answer it like that. If you really want to answer it, you've got to take this data and actually model the entirety of the system.
Yeah, so if that's from the sort of the demand side, and then from the supply side, we do have carbon pricing across quite a lot of emissions. I think it's something like 20 to 30% of the world's emissions have some sort of carbon pricing attached to them. Whether you can say that's high enough, it isn't, but in my view. But and we do actually have a lot of companies that do, and governments that do shadow pricing. So they don't, while there's nobody paying those that amount, they're shadow pricing it so that they know what the risk is, the exposure to it is, if the carbon pricing does come about. And the last thing I would mention on carbon pricing and international carbon pricing generally is this issue of upstream emissions that are being imported from elsewhere. This is a serious issue in terms of potential carbon leakage. One of the things that seems to suggest is that once big players come in with actual definitive carbon pricing, in terms of game theory, countries and regions are more incentivized to join that carbon pricing scheme. So there is a way of building up from below towards a global carbon price, but it would take quite a long time. Yeah, if you want to talk about the social cost of carbon and how that's modeled, we can do, but that's kind of going into the weeds a little bit.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, in theory, there's a very interesting question, but it brings, game theory, social change dilemma, and so many other theoretical things that are tough to address. And again, so if you try to really make an impact, and again, that project that initiative that I mentioned down in Chile, right, from the Ministry of Energy, is an interesting way of going. The coal assets are priced still at a very low price. That's a different conversation, but they are priced already. And in an attempt to kind of like internalize those externalities, is that the government are bringing the right companies on this voluntary basis to start testing, right? And 11 coal assets in 2 years to phase out those. It's not a trivial impact in the operations of any of those big companies, right? But I think again, governments are in the right position to try to, in a controlled way, internalize those externalities, but there's nobody else than governments and high regulatory bodies that are going to be able to achieve those kind of initiatives. And in terms of the carrot of the stick, to put it simple, it cannot be the stick, right? It has to be the carrot, and it has to be a right, balance between both, if you wish.
And who would you pay this to? Because it's not like to your government, right? But it's a global impact. So who would you pay this? If you were to, for example, carbon taxing, you're paying it to your government, but the actual social impact is global. So that's kind of interesting, right? That's a hard to address situation.
No, certainly.
Okay, guys, I think we are just 5 minutes left to the end of this event. It has been a pleasure to have these speakers. Obviously, thanks you to Paul, Diego, and Morgan for all these insightful thoughts. And I think not only me and not only Stefania and Amelia, I think we all the attendants have a little bit more of understanding of how the energy transition will be in terms of the social responsibility that imply, right? So super helpful was this event, and I think Amelia wanted to have some words of thanks to you, Amelia.
Just want to echo the thanks for a wonderful panel about energy and the future of energy. Thank you so much to Paul, Diego, and Morgan for being here. Thank you to the Energy Club for making this panel happen. And the next and final panel of the Social Responsibility Forum is today at 6 p.m. on economic inclusion. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much. Bye, guys. Bye.
Welcome, Vivian.
Hi, Vivian.
Hi.
Hi, Rashida. No, we don't hear you.
Hi. Now you hear me?
Yeah.
Vivian, sí.
Okay.
We don't hear Rashida.
Okay.
How are you, Vivian?
Fine, thank you. And you?
Very good, thank you.
Good.
All right, let's try to figure out some things before the actual panel. We're gonna test. We're gonna test the mic and the videos. Jorge's connecting over there. Hi, Jorge.
Hello. Hola, Ana. Hello, everyone.
Hi, welcome.
How are you? Welcome.
Thank you. How are you? How's everybody doing?
Good. Excited about this.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Good hour and a bit.
Yeah.
We're gonna do some sound and video tests. Throughout the panel, we're gonna, Rubina and myself, or the moderators, will have our videos off, but you guys can keep them on until the panel ends. But we just want to make sure that everything works.
Okay.
Anna, can you see me for now?
Yes, I can see you.
Oh, okay. I can't actually see myself.
Oh, Rashida, we can't hear you yet.
Oh, I just need to change my view. Got it. No, we're good.
No, I can't hear you. I see that you're talking, but
either.
we cannot hear you. Okay, she left that. Wait. One second.
Hello, everyone. I just want to let you know I'm here. My name is Amelia, and I am with Ana Maria and Rubina on the Net Impact Club. And I just want to remind everyone that this is a live webinar room, so attendees will be coming in and they will see and hear everything we're doing. So, but Rubina and Ana Maria are running this show today, so I will be in the background.
All right. Thank you, Emilia. Nice to meet you.
Thanks, Amelia. Ruby, I'm checking with Rashida to see what happened with her link.
Okay.
I'll let you know.
Okay.
Okay.
Fingers crossed. It'll come together. Jorge and Vivian, I just, right in the beginning, I'll just do a quick introduction. I'll just introduce you guys and then ask an open general question. And that'll be, either of you can jump in, or when Rashida joins us, she can jump in. So just start off with a general and then we'll ask more detailed specific things.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you, Rubina.
You guys are going to be awesome.
Sí, señor.
Hope so. That's the idea. Rubina, I received a list of questions from Ana Maria. Is that like the same format you will follow throughout the session?
Pretty much, yes. The first question
Okay.
the first two I've just put together, kind of smushed them together, but generally that'll be, there's no real order because it'll be more of a discussion, but there's not going to be too much new. So those pieces are already there, yeah.
All right, amazing. Thanks.
Okay, we've got Rashida back. Rashida, do you want to try your mic again? No, I can see your video. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
I can't hear you either.
You can't hear me? Jorge, you can't hear me?
Yeah, I do hear everyone except for Rashida.
For Rashida, yes, okay. Yeah, I think she's able to thread that out. Still have a few minutes.
Maybe something with the mic settings in the PC or something. Like I sometimes have trouble with that. The computer just mutes itself. You don't know what's happening.
Yeah, or it changes the input.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to go into your settings to, especially if you're.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello.
Hi,
Yeah.
yes, we can hear you.
Hello.
Now we're in.
Hi, Rashida, we can hear you.
Nothing.
Yes. We can
hear you. Yeah, we can hear you.
Or maybe she can't hear us.